Hi. On this very cold morning, I've put the oven on and just opened the oven door a little bit to try to heat up the air in this flat. It's extraordinarily cold, and I'm wearing my shawl from Bengal, from West Bengal. I think I got it on my first visit in 2024. I'd really like to be able to go back, but I've got no money. Some people assume I do, that I'm just floating around in money. But I actually am sort of like holding the fort, so to speak, financially for two people. And that means I'm the only one that works. I have two jobs, and it's really hard to make ends meet. But spiritually and in terms of connection to place, I really like being in West Bengal. And that's where it all started for my mother's Anglo-Indian line. And it started in the context of the separation of five so-called illegitimate children from their native mothers. We don't know their identities. We assume they're Muslim. That's how much research I've been able to do. Um, we have photographs of several of the siblings of that generation who were half caste and placed in a military orphanage upper school, which also served as a place to domicile spinsters. Now, that word is awful, I know, but in the case of those five children, only only two of them were women. That's Jessie Grant and her sister Isabel Grant, and Isabel was domiciled at the grounds of the school orphanage until she was an older woman. I think, as far as I can tell from the records, up to the age of 68, and this is, sort of tenants lists that were kept kept in the colonial archives, and I can ascertain that like every year they're taken, and the sort of like objective of that is to see which ones can get married, and she doesn't. So Isabel, I honor you. But Jessie did get married, and she had a whole lot of kids, and they had kids, and they had kids. Some of them migrated out of India, some of them stayed. Um, let's see, I'm only in Australia because her brother, um, his name was Frederick Grant, and he married and had a child called Una. And so that's my granny Una, my mom's grandmother, my great grandmother. So the child of a so called half caste person. She herself looks Eurasian from her photos, but she came to Australia with her children, my grandfather and my great uncles and great aunts, and they quote unquote settled in Western Australia's southwest in a place called Carnama, on a property that they bought from the Midland Railway Company, which was headquartered at um, the centre of the empire, London, its operations. And effectively, yeah, they renamed this place Dilkusha, which is after the colony in Lucknow. And it also means in Urdu, it means heart is happy. So they were trying for happiness, but in fact, family law tells us that they weren't entirely happy. Certainly, Una was not happy with her husband, who was 15 years her senior. And the women in that line constantly married Irish men. And my mother did as well, or someone who was a descendant of an Irish family. Yeah, there's a pattern. There's definitely a pattern. So I'm very interested in this part of family history, connecting us back to Kidapur, which is in West Kolkata. I have visited the grounds of Kidapur House, of the military orphanage school. I've spoken to the current director of the boys' school that exists there alongside a girls' school. It's on the same grounds, albeit the actual original buildings were demolished in, I think, 1986. Yeah, I've done a lot of kind of on-site research as well, not just like in physical locations, although that's important, I think, but also within the archives. And I'm endeavoring, or I have endeavored to reimagine the lives of some of my ancestors, particularly from that generation where their mothers had no sort of rights over keeping their kids. Um, and instead they were institutionalized and educated through the British colonial system to become, sort of servants to the empire. So it's a sad story in many ways, but there are other parts of the story which are not exclusively sad. This is people caught up in desperate circumstances, really, and kind of being fish out of water, being part of the so-called Eurasian problem, as it was termed then, back in the time in which direct control was exercised from the former East India Company to Queen Victoria's control after the so-called Sepoy Mutiny, known as, from a British perspective, the rebellion of the natives, right? The mutiny in Lucknow. And my relatives, my ancestors were also implicated in that in some way. But, being from Anglo-Indian heritage and having that history, this nebulous class of people that were underlings of empire and wished to be as British as possible, even though they were never considered appropriate for anything except administrative roles. Well, it's a strange consciousness. I'm not sure if I would say it's like double consciousness, but navigating those circuits of privilege and being a class apart, it's something that really reverberates. And I would say arguably also intergenerational trauma, because when you remove children from their mothers and you place them in an institution, who knows what goes on in those contexts? Well, we can have a bit of a guess, right? But most of it's speculation. I do know that my grandfather, however, was someone that was recalled in family terms as having had PTSD. I don't think you can retrospectively diagnose personally. And he was a difficult man. He was even referred to by his sister, who also migrated as a child to Australia, as having a very difficult character and treating my grandmother like proverbial SHIT. But I've also unearthed the fact that, and I'm sorry if this is triggering, but that he basically molested his eldest daughter, who fled the context in which I grew up, much like I did many decades later after disclosing what had happened to me in my family environment. And so these are such strange trajectories, and I grapple with them, like how much of this has been passed across generations. My mother herself was subject to a lot of traumatic events, including having her firstborn taken from her, which is very reminiscent of those generations previous of children being removed. And I see it as a puzzle, I see it as a problem, I see it as something that ancestral memories kind of get passed down, and sometimes I find out how to separate my own trauma from maybe what is inherited. I don't want to shroud this in mysticism. I just want to say that the epigenetic, phenomenological kind of elements of trauma and transmission transgenerationally, they're real, and there's a lot of research that backs that up. So, what do you all think? I mean, I've just sketched out some very minor details, even if there's a few there that are a bit shocking. What is it about the family systems that are inherited across colonial sites? I'm still grappling with this.